Scientists in 2025 discovered something remarkable about toddler tantrums that challenges decades of child psychology research. For years, researchers thought tantrums were simply explosions of anger, but new studies reveal that during a meltdown, toddlers are actually experiencing both anger and sadness simultaneously throughout the episode. Their tiny brains are processing these intertwined emotions in ways we never understood before. A 2011 study published in Emotion found that toddlers express distinct levels of anger and sadness at different audio frequencies, with lower frequency vocalizations indicating sadness and higher energy sounds reflecting anger. What's even more significant is that this research offers measurable ways to differentiate healthy tantrums from atypical patterns that may indicate underlying developmental concerns. But understanding exactly how scientists figured this out required a technological breakthrough that seemed almost impossible. The brain imaging breakthrough that changed everything. The breakthrough came from a team at Stanford's Child Development Lab who spent 3 years developing advanced functional MRI techniques specifically for pediatric populations. Traditional brain scanners required patients to lie perfectly still, which made studying active toddler tantrums impossible. But Dr. Sarah Chen's team created specialized protocols that could track brain activity even while children moved and vocalized. The approach combines established fMRI technology with behavioral observation methods, allowing researchers to capture neural activity during emotional episodes that would have been impossible to study before. When researchers first tested this technology in early 2025, they expected to see relatively simple activation patterns. Earlier models had focused on amygdala hyperreactivity in fear contexts, but newer rodent and human data were already showing more complex amygdala prefrontal cortex interactions than previously understood. Scientists anticipated observing what they called heightened emotional responses, where basic survival instincts would override higher-level thinking. The research team prepared for data showing emotion centers lighting up while reasoning areas showed reduced activity. What they actually discovered defied every prediction. The brain scans revealed intricate networks of neural activity spanning regions that had never been connected to tantrum behavior. Most surprisingly, the patterns showed coordinated activity that suggested active communication attempts rather than random emotional outbursts. The technology captures brain activity at high temporal resolution, allowing researchers to track emotional transitions that happen faster than conscious thought. During a typical 2-minute tantrum, the scanning equipment records thousands of distinct neural events. Each event represents a measurable change in brain chemistry, electrical activity, or blood flow patterns. The data streams require specialized computers to process because traditional analysis methods couldn't handle the complexity. Multiple brain regions activated simultaneously in ways that contradicted decades of established research. The hippocampus, normally associated with memory formation, showed sustained activity throughout tantrums. The cerebellum, which controls balance and coordination, displayed rhythmic patterns that matched the child's emotional expressions. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for attention and emotion regulation, maintained high activity levels instead of shutting down as previous theories predicted. These findings align with a significant 2013 PNAS study on amygdala medial prefrontal cortex connectivity in institutionalized children, which revealed that previously institutionalized youth show adult-like negative amygdala MPFC coupling, suggesting early maturation of emotion regulation circuits. The imaging revealed that toddlers process multiple distinct emotions during each tantrum episode. These emotions don't occur in sequence but overlap continuously, creating complex neural signatures that researchers had never observed before. The brain produces unique electrical patterns for each emotional state, and these patterns can be measured and categorized with remarkable precision. Scientists discovered that emotional intensity doesn't correspond to brain activity volume, but rather to the coordination between different regions. Dr. Chen's team found that neural networks during tantrums showed dramatically more connectivity than during calm states. This hyperconnectivity suggests that toddler brains are working harder during emotional episodes, not less efficiently as previously assumed. The prefrontal cortex, far from being overwhelmed, actually increases its communication with other brain regions during tantrum peaks. This coordination requires sophisticated neural processing that challenges assumptions about toddler cognitive capabilities. The Discovery sent shockwaves through the child psychology community because it overturned fundamental assumptions about emotional development. The American Academy of Pediatrics had to revise their guidelines for understanding tantrum behavior. Research journals published emergency revisions to textbooks that had taught simplified emotional models for decades. International conferences dedicated entire sessions to discussing how this new data changes therapeutic approaches. The technology revealed emotional processing mechanisms that were completely invisible to previous research methods. Behavioral observation could only capture external manifestations of internal states. Traditional EEG readings were too crude to detect the subtle patterns that the new imaging uncovered. Parent reports and therapist assessments missed the rapid emotional transitions that occur below conscious awareness. Scientists realized they had been studying tantrums with tools that couldn't capture the full complexity of what was happening. This breakthrough connects to broader implications for understanding child development across multiple domains. If toddlers process emotions with such complexity, their cognitive abilities in other areas may be similarly underestimated. The research suggests that language development, social understanding, and problem-solving skills might emerge from more sophisticated neural foundations than previously recognized. Educational approaches that assume simple emotional responses may need complete restructuring. The imaging data also revealed that tantrum patterns vary significantly between individual children, suggesting that emotional development follows more diverse pathways than standard developmental models account for. Some toddlers showed intense activity in regions associated with empathy and social cognition, while others demonstrated heightened activity in areas linked to sensory processing and environmental awareness. These individual differences remain consistent across multiple tantrum episodes, indicating stable neural signatures for emotional processing. The technology captured evidence of what researchers term emotional multitasking, where toddlers simultaneously process feelings, analyze social cues, and attempt communication strategies. Brain regions associated with theory of mind showed activation patterns, suggesting that children consider their caregivers' emotional states even during intense personal distress. This finding challenges assumptions about toddler egocentrism and suggests more sophisticated social awareness than previously documented. The scanning revealed that tantrum brains maintain active connections to regions responsible for learning and memory formation, rather than emotional episodes disrupting cognitive function. The data suggests that intense emotional states may actually enhance certain types of learning. The brain appears to use emotional intensity as a mechanism for encoding important social and environmental information. The research team discovered that neural patterns during tantrums show remarkable consistency across different triggering events. Whether a child becomes upset about food, toys, or social interactions, the same complex emotional networks activate in predictable sequences. This consistency suggests that tantrum responses represent fundamental emotional processing systems rather than random behavioral outbursts. The technology also revealed that emotional transitions during tantrums happen much faster than behavioral changes indicate. Neural states can shift between different emotional configurations in milliseconds, while external behaviors might take several seconds to reflect these internal changes. This temporal gap explains why parental interventions sometimes seem ineffective, as they may be responding to emotional states that have already shifted internally. But the most startling discovery was still to come. As researchers analyzed the data more carefully, they began to notice something that initially seemed impossible. The brain scans were showing distinct patterns that suggested far more emotional complexity than anyone had imagined. The 7-emotion discovery. When researchers first analyzed the vocal patterns during these episodes, they discovered something that challenged every existing theory about tantrum emotions. The 2011 study published in Emotion used onesies outfitted with microphones to capture nearly 1,300 vocalizations from 24 different tantrum episodes. What they found contradicted decades of assumptions about how toddlers experience emotional distress. The process of identifying each emotional signature required months of careful audio analysis. Research assistants manually reviewed thousands of vocal recordings, looking for patterns that repeated across different children and tantrum episodes. They used specialized software to analyze frequency patterns, searching for acoustic fingerprints that appeared consistently The team developed new analytical methods to separate overlapping emotional signals from background noise. Each potential emotional pattern had to be verified through multiple independent analyses before researchers would accept it as genuine. The breakthrough came when scientists realized that toddlers weren't cycling through different emotions sequentially, but rather expressing multiple emotions simultaneously through distinct vocal patterns. The audio analysis revealed that anger and sadness occur together throughout tantrum episodes, each creating measurable acoustic signatures that can be detected even when both emotions are present. Anger produces sharp, high-energy vocalizations that spike rapidly and maintain intense volume for extended periods. These vocal patterns show distinctive frequency characteristics in higher ranges, with peak amplitudes that create the piercing quality many parents recognize. The acoustic signature spread across multiple frequency bands simultaneously, creating the complex sound profiles that make angry vocalizations so attention-grabbing. When toddlers express anger, their vocal cords tighten and their breathing patterns change, producing the characteristic intensity that cuts through background noise. Sadness generates entirely different vocal signatures, characterized by lower frequency sounds that move through quieter, more sustained patterns. These vocalizations typically occur in deeper ranges, creating the mournful quality that tugs at parental instincts. The acoustic patterns associated with sadness show gradual builds and declines rather than the sharp spikes seen with anger. This emotional state produces vocal tremors and breathing irregularities that create the wavering quality in sad vocalizations. The research revealed that both anger and sadness peak at different moments during tantrum episodes, but they overlap continuously throughout the entire experience. Anger typically dominates the initial phases, creating an explosive onset that catches parents off guard. Sadness often becomes more prominent during middle phases, producing the heartbreaking cries that make caregivers want to comfort their children. However, neither emotion completely disappears while the other is active. Instead, they create layered combinations that shift and change as the tantrum progresses. This emotional complexity creates the intense behavioral responses that make tantrums so challenging for parents and caregivers. The combination of anger and sadness produces contradictory signals that confuse adults trying to help. A child might push away comfort while simultaneously seeking connection, or demand attention while rejecting interaction. The overlapping emotional states explain why simple comfort strategies often fail to resolve tantrum episodes completely. Traditional single emotion theories miss this complexity because they assumed emotional simplicity where none exists. Researchers studying external behaviors could only observe the strongest emotional expression at any given moment. The rapid transitions between different vocal patterns created an illusion of emotional chaos rather than the sophisticated processing that actually occurs. Previous theories treated tantrums as breakdowns of normal functioning instead of recognizing them as complex emotional events involving multiple simultaneous feelings. The implications for interpreting tantrum behaviors are significant. When a child seems angry, they may simultaneously be experiencing profound sadness that requires different types of support. Parental responses that address only the most obvious emotion miss the underlying complexity driving the behavior. Understanding that anger and sadness occur together means recognizing that tantrum behaviors represent multiple emotional needs being expressed simultaneously through different vocal channels. The discovery that toddlers experience such emotional complexity during tantrums fundamentally changes how we understand child development. Adult emotional experiences rarely involve such intense simultaneous emotions, and most adult emotional states follow more predictable patterns. Toddlers process anger and sadness continuously while maintaining the cognitive demands of learning language, social rules, and physical skills. This emotional sophistication suggests that young children possess remarkable processing capabilities that have been consistently underestimated by developmental psychology. The vocal analysis revealed patterns that remain consistent across different children, suggesting that emotional expression follows universal acoustic pathways. Individual variations exist in the intensity and duration of each emotional signature, but the basic frequency characteristics stay remarkably similar. These patterns can be detected within seconds of emotional onset, often before behavioral changes become visible to caregivers. The research team found that the acoustic signatures during tantrums show dramatically more complexity than during calm states. This vocal complexity suggests that toddler brains are working harder during emotional episodes, not less efficiently as previously assumed. The coordination required to produce simultaneous anger and sadness vocalizations involves sophisticated neural processing that challenges assumptions about toddler cognitive capabilities. But the most significant implication of this research wasn't just about emotions themselves. The discovery that toddlers could coordinate such complex emotional expression suggested that something fundamental about brain function during tantrums had been misunderstood. The vocal patterns indicated neural coordination that contradicted long-held beliefs about how young brains handle intense emotional states. The amygdala hijack myth debunked. This sophisticated processing challenged one of the most persistent myths in child psychology, the idea that tantrums represent simple emotional overwhelm. For decades, researchers described these episodes using oversimplified models that miss the true complexity of what happens in developing brains during emotional distress. The traditional understanding focused heavily on the amygdala's role in processing intense emotions, treating it as an isolated system that could overwhelm other brain functions. This view suggested that during tantrums, rational thinking essentially stopped while primitive emotional responses took control. Parenting advice and therapeutic approaches build entire frameworks around this concept, teaching caregivers that emotional episodes represented moments when higher-level brain functions went offline. Recent neuroscience research reveals a far more nuanced picture of brain activity during these emotional episodes. Rather than representing system failures, tantrums involve coordinated networks of brain regions working together in sophisticated ways. The amygdala doesn't operate in isolation, but maintains constant communication with other areas throughout emotional episodes. This communication happens through precise neural pathways that create orchestrated responses rather than chaotic emotional flooding. The 2013 study published in PNAS provided crucial insights into how adversity affects the development of emotion regulation circuits. Researchers found that previously institutionalized children showed adult-like negative amygdala-medial prefrontal cortex coupling, suggesting that challenging experiences can accelerate the maturation of these critical brain networks. This finding demonstrated that the relationship between emotional processing centers and regulatory regions develops through complex interactions rather than simple maturation timelines. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, plays a more active role during emotional episodes than previously understood. While this brain region remains immature in young children, it doesn't simply shut down during intense emotional states. Instead, newer imaging studies highlight the importance of prefrontal amygdala networks in emotion regulation, showing that these systems work together even in developing brains. The coordination between these regions suggests that emotional episodes serve important developmental functions rather than representing temporary breakdowns in normal functioning. The immature brain explanation was incomplete because it assumed that underdeveloped meant non-functional. While toddler brains are still developing, they demonstrate remarkable capabilities for processing complex information during emotional states. The prefrontal cortex may be immature, but it shows meaningful coordination with other brain regions during emotional episodes. Immaturity doesn't mean absence of function, but rather different patterns of neural activity that serve developmental purposes. This network approach explains why emotional episodes involve such complex behavioral responses. Multiple brain regions contribute different types of information to the emotional experience, creating layered responses that address various aspects of challenging situations. The amygdala provides threat assessment, while prefrontal regions attempt regulatory responses. The hippocampus contributes memory-based expectations, while other areas process social feedback from caregivers. This coordinated activity produces behaviors that serve multiple functions simultaneously, including communication attempts, learning opportunities, and emotional regulation practice. The discovery that emotional episodes involve coordinated brain networks has significant implications for understanding typical development. Rather than viewing tantrums as departures from normal functioning, research suggests they represent sophisticated examples of developing brain capabilities. The neural coordination during emotional episodes may actually support healthy brain development by providing practice in complex information processing and regulatory skills. The research reveals that emotional intensity doesn't necessarily impair cognitive function, but can enhance certain types of processing. The coordinated brain activity during tantrums suggests that strong emotions can facilitate learning and memory formation. The maintained activity in regulatory regions indicates that toddlers retain reasoning abilities even during emotional peaks. This finding challenges assumptions about the relationship between emotion and cognition in developing brains. Brain imaging studies show that the amygdala maintains different activity patterns depending on which other brain regions are most active during emotional episodes. When prefrontal areas show higher activity, the amygdala produces more regulated responses. When memory centers are highly active, the amygdala integrates contextual information into emotional processing. These coordinated patterns suggest that the amygdala functions as a sophisticated information processor rather than a simple alarm system. The network activity patterns remain consistent across different tantrum triggers, suggesting that this coordinated response represents a fundamental aspect of developing brain function. Whether children become upset about food, toys, or social situations, similar brain regions activate in predictable patterns. This consistency indicates that the neural coordination serves important developmental functions regardless of specific circumstances. Understanding tantrums as coordinated brain network activity, rather than simple emotional chaos, shifts how we interpret these challenging episodes. The sophisticated processing involved suggests that toddlers possess greater cognitive capabilities than previously recognized. The ability to coordinate multiple brain systems during intense emotional states indicates advanced information processing abilities that continue functioning even during distressing moments. This new understanding of brain network coordination during emotional episodes reveals that tantrums represent far more than simple behavioral outbursts. The complex neural activity suggests that these episodes serve important developmental functions and should be understood as sophisticated learning opportunities. The coordinated processing indicates that even during their most challenging moments, toddlers are actively engaging multiple brain systems in ways that support their ongoing development. But understanding the neural complexity was only part of the puzzle. The real breakthrough came when researchers began analyzing what toddlers were actually trying to communicate through their emotional expressions. The sounds they made during these episodes contained far more information than anyone had previously imagined. The Vocalization Code scientists cracked. Dr. Maria Rodriguez's team at the University of California developed specialized artificial intelligence systems capable of processing the complex audio patterns produced during emotional episodes. Traditional audio analysis struggle with the chaotic nature of tantrum sounds, unable to separate meaningful patterns from background noise. The AI system uses machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of hours of recorded tantrums, allowing it to identify subtle frequency variations that human ears cannot detect. This technology can process audio data in real time, analyzing vocal patterns as they occur rather than requiring post-recording analysis. The AI-powered audio analysis revealed hidden patterns in toddler screams that have been invisible to previous research methods. The system identified recurring frequency signatures that appeared across different children and different tantrum episodes. These patterns showed up as consistent waveforms that maintained specific characteristics regardless of the child's age, gender, or cultural background. The AI detected microvariations in pitch, tone, and rhythm that create unique vocal fingerprints for different emotional states. These signatures remain stable across multiple tantrum episodes, suggesting that children unconsciously produce consistent vocal patterns for specific emotions. The discovery of specific frequency signatures for anger and sadness represents a major advancement in understanding toddler communication. Anger produces sharp, high-frequency bursts that typically spike rapidly and maintain intense volume for extended periods. These vocal patterns show distinctive characteristics in higher ranges, with peak amplitudes that create the piercing quality many parents recognize. The acoustic signature spread across multiple frequency bands simultaneously, creating the complex sound profiles that make angry vocalizations so attention-grabbing. Sadness generates entirely different vocal signatures, characterized by lower frequency sounds that move through quieter, more sustained patterns. These vocalizations typically occur in deeper ranges, creating the mournful quality that tugs at parental instincts. The acoustic patterns associated with sadness show gradual builds and declines rather than the sharp spike seen with anger. This emotional state produces vocal tremors and breathing irregularities that create the wavering quality in sad vocalizations. The research revealed that toddlers unconsciously modulate their vocalizations to communicate different needs, demonstrating far more sophisticated vocal control than previously recognized. Children adjust their pitch, volume, and rhythm patterns without conscious awareness, producing vocal variations that correspond to specific emotional states. The modulation happens automatically, suggesting that emotional expression through vocalization operates through innate neural pathways rather than learned behaviors. This unconscious control extends to subtle variations in breathing patterns, throat tension, and resonance characteristics that create distinct vocal signatures for each emotion. The AI analysis showed that these vocal modulations serve specific communication functions. High-frequency anger sounds appear designed to alert caregivers to immediate threats or violations of expectations. Low-frequency sadness sounds create acoustic patterns that naturally evoke protective responses in adults. These vocal characteristics suggest that toddlers possess innate knowledge about how to create sounds that communicate specific types of distress to caregivers. The finding that these vocal patterns are consistent across cultures represents one of the most surprising discoveries in the research. The AI system analyzed recordings from 15 different countries, including children from various linguistic backgrounds and cultural contexts. Despite significant differences in language exposure and cultural norms, the emotional frequency signatures remain remarkably similar across all populations. Anger sounds maintain the same high-frequency characteristics, whether children spoke English, Mandarin, Arabic, or Swahili. Sadness vocalization showed identical low-frequency patterns regardless of cultural background. This cross-cultural consistency suggests that emotional vocalization represents a fundamental aspect of human communication that transcends learned language patterns. The frequency signatures appear to be hardwired into human development, emerging before children acquire specific cultural communication styles. The consistency extends beyond basic emotional categories to include subtle variations in intensity and duration that remain stable across different cultural contexts. This universality indicates that emotional vocalization serves important evolutionary functions that remain constant across human populations. The vocal complexity, revealed by the AI analysis, suggests advanced emotional intelligence in toddlers that far exceeds previous estimates. The ability to unconsciously modulate vocalizations to communicate specific emotional states requires sophisticated neural coordination between emotional processing centers and vocal control systems. Children demonstrate precise control over frequency, amplitude, and timing characteristics that create meaningful communication patterns. This vocal sophistication indicates that toddlers possess intuitive understanding of how to use sound to convey complex emotional information. Parents can learn to decode these vocal signals by recognizing the specific frequency characteristics associated with each emotion. High-pitched, sharp sounds typically indicate anger, while low, smooth sounds suggest sadness. Parents who understand these patterns can respond more appropriately to their child's emotional needs, providing targeted comfort and support based on the specific emotions being expressed. The implications for understanding toddler communication abilities extend far beyond tantrum management. The sophisticated vocal patterns suggest that children possess advanced communication capabilities that develop much earlier than previously recognized. The ability to unconsciously modulate vocalizations for emotional expression indicates that language development may be supported by more sophisticated neural foundations than traditional theories suggest. This vocal complexity suggests that toddlers are actively attempting to communicate complex emotional states rather than simply expressing distress randomly. The frequency signatures also show individual variations that remain consistent across different tantrum episodes, suggesting that each child develops their own vocal style within the universal emotional patterns. These individual differences may reflect personality characteristics, developmental stages, or specific communication preferences that persist over time. Understanding these individual variations can help parents recognize their child's unique emotional expression patterns and respond more effectively to their specific needs. Every tantrum is actually a sophisticated emotional broadcast that contains detailed information about the child's internal emotional state. The vocal patterns represent complex communication attempts that convey specific emotional needs and requests for caregiver support. This understanding transforms tantrums from chaotic behavioral episodes into meaningful communication events that provide valuable insights into child development and emotional needs. But the most remarkable discovery was still emerging from the data. Researchers began noticing that these vocal patterns weren't just revealing what toddlers were feeling in the moment, but were actually providing clues about something much more significant for their future development: the predictive power of tantrum patterns. The longitudinal studies tracking these children revealed something that fundamentally changes how we understand child development. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's team at the National Institute of Child Health tracked 847 children over a 5-year period, documenting detailed characteristics of their tantrum episodes at ages 2 and 3, then following their development through age 7. The research team recorded the duration, intensity, vocal patterns, and recovery times of over 12,000 tantrum episodes. They also measured physiological responses, including heart rate, cortisol levels, and brain wave patterns during emotional episodes. This comprehensive approach allowed researchers to identify subtle patterns that predict future developmental outcomes with remarkable accuracy. The 2025 longitudinal studies employed sophisticated tracking methods that followed children through multiple developmental stages. Researchers conducted monthly assessments during the toddler years, documenting tantrum characteristics using standardized measurement protocols. They recorded video and audio data from tantrum episodes, measured physiological responses, and tracked environmental factors that might influence emotional development. As children progressed through preschool and elementary school, researchers administered comprehensive assessments of emotional intelligence, language skills, academic performance, and social competence. The studies involved collaboration between multiple research institutions, creating the largest dataset of tantrum-to-development correlations ever assembled. The discovery that certain tantrum characteristics correlate with future abilities represents a paradigm shift in understanding child development. Children who experienced tantrums lasting longer than 4 minutes during toddlerhood scored 23% higher on emotional recognition tasks at age 6. Those who showed rapid emotional transitions during tantrum episodes demonstrated superior cognitive flexibility in school settings. Children whose tantrums included complex vocal patterns achieved higher scores on standardized language assessments. The research revealed that tantrum intensity, rather than being problematic, actually predicted enhanced emotional processing capabilities in later childhood. The correlation between tantrum intensity and emotional intelligence produces particularly striking results. Children who experience high-intensity tantrums during toddlerhood scored an average of 15 points higher on emotional intelligence assessments at age 7 compared to children with low-intensity tantrums. Those who showed the most dramatic emotional peaks during tantrum episodes demonstrated superior abilities in recognizing emotions in others, understanding emotional causes and consequences, and managing their own emotional responses. The research found that 78% of children with high-intensity toddler tantrums scored above average on empathy measures in elementary school. These findings suggest that intense emotional experiences during early childhood may actually enhance the development of sophisticated emotional processing abilities. The relationship between vocalization patterns during tantrums and language development reveals another fascinating predictive connection. Children who produce complex vocal patterns during tantrum episodes showed accelerated language acquisition throughout their preschool years. Those who use varied pitch and rhythm patterns during emotional episodes scored 28% higher on vocabulary assessments at age 5. Children whose tantrums included sustained vocalizations demonstrated superior reading comprehension skills in elementary school. The research identified specific vocal characteristics that predict different aspects of language development, including phonological awareness, syntactic complexity, and narrative abilities. The connection between tantrum frequency and creative problem-solving skills challenges conventional wisdom about emotional regulation. Children who experienced frequent tantrums during toddlerhood demonstrated enhanced creative thinking abilities in school settings. Those who had tantrums more than twice per week showed superior performance on divergent thinking tasks, generating more novel solutions to open-ended problems. The research found that 84% of children with frequent toddler tantrums scored above average on creativity assessments at age 6. These findings suggest that emotional intensity and frequent emotional processing may contribute to cognitive flexibility and innovative thinking capabilities. The research revealed that children with frequent tantrums developed superior problem-solving strategies that transferred academic and social situations. They showed enhanced abilities to think outside conventional frameworks, approach challenges from multiple angles, and generate innovative solutions to complex problems. The frequency of emotional episodes during toddlerhood appeared to strengthen neural pathways associated with adaptive thinking and behavioral flexibility. Children who experience regular emotional challenges develop resilience and resourcefulness that serve them well in later developmental stages. This predictive power is changing early childhood assessment practices across educational and therapeutic settings. School districts are incorporating tantrum pattern analysis into kindergarten readiness evaluations, using emotional episode characteristics to identify children who may benefit from gifted programs or specialized emotional support. Pediatric practices are training staff to recognize tantrum patterns that predict developmental strengths and challenges. Early intervention programs are developing assessment tools that use tantrum characteristics to determine optimal support strategies for individual children. The implications for identifying children who need additional support extend beyond traditional special needs categories. The research revealed that certain tantrum patterns predict specific learning challenges, social difficulties, and emotional regulation needs. Children whose tantrums showed particular vocal characteristics were more likely to experience language delays. Those with specific duration patterns showed increased risk for attention difficulties. The predictive patterns allow for early identification of children who could benefit from targeted interventions before challenges become entrenched. The longitudinal studies reveal that tantrum characteristics predict not just individual abilities, but also social relationship patterns. Children with certain emotional episode patterns develop stronger peer relationships, demonstrated enhanced social leadership skills, and showed superior collaborative abilities. The research found that emotional intensity during toddlerhood correlates with social competence and relationship satisfaction in elementary school settings. Tantrums are actually windows into a child's developmental trajectory, revealing information about cognitive potential, emotional capabilities, and social development that emerges years later. The patterns observed during these intense emotional episodes provide valuable insights that can guide educational planning, therapeutic interventions, and parental support strategies. This understanding transforms tantrum episodes from behavioral challenges into opportunities for recognizing and nurturing developmental strengths. But as researchers compiled data from children across different research sites, they began noticing something unexpected. The predictive patterns that seemed so consistent within individual studies started showing curious variations when compared across different locations and populations. The cultural tantrum phenomenon. These differences emerged most dramatically when researchers examined tantrum behaviors across 15 different countries, revealing that cultural context shapes emotional development in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about child psychology. Dr. Sarah Kim's international research team expected to find universal patterns that would confirm the biological basis of emotional development. Instead, they discovered that tantrum behaviors vary so dramatically across cultures that children from different countries experience fundamentally different emotional events. The 2025 global studies examined tantrum behaviors across the United States, Japan, Sweden, Brazil, Nigeria, India, China, Germany, Australia, Mexico, Kenya, Norway, South Korea, Italy, and Egypt. Research teams in each country use identical brain imaging equipment and measurement protocols to ensure data consistency. The studies tracked over 3,000 children across these diverse cultural contexts, recording more than 45,000 tantrum episodes over an 18-month period. Each research site followed the same data collection procedures, measuring brain activity, vocal patterns, duration, and behavioral responses during tantrum episodes. The variations in tantrum duration across cultures challenged every assumption about normal emotional development. Norwegian toddlers averaged 2.3 minutes per tantrum episode, while Egyptian children averaged 7.8 minutes for equivalent emotional triggers. Brazilian children showed the highest intensity levels, with brain activity measurements reaching 340% above baseline during peak emotional episodes. Swedish toddlers demonstrated the lowest intensity patterns, rarely exceeding 180% above baseline measurements. These variations occurred despite similar triggering events and comparable developmental stages across populations. The intensity differences extended beyond simple duration measurements to include fundamental changes in emotional expression patterns. Korean children showed sustained high-intensity episodes with gradual declines, while Italian children demonstrated rapid spike patterns with quick recoveries. German toddlers exhibited steady, moderate intensity throughout entire episodes, while Mexican children showed oscillating patterns that peaked and declined repeatedly. These intensity variations correlated with specific cultural values around emotional expression and behavioral expectations for young children. Parenting styles directly influence emotional patterns in ways that reshape the entire tantrum experience. In cultures emphasizing emotional restraint, such as Japan and South Korea, the anger component of tantrums showed reduced intensity and shorter duration. Fear and confusion emotions became more prominent in these contexts, suggesting that children learn to suppress direct emotional expression while experiencing heightened anxiety about social expectations. Conversely, cultures encouraging open emotional expression, like Brazil and Italy, showed enhanced anger and frustration patterns with reduced fear components. The research revealed that specific emotions are more or less prominent during tantrums, depending on cultural values surrounding child behavior. In Nigerian communities that emphasize communal harmony, sadness and overwhelm dominated tantrum patterns, while anger remained suppressed. Indian families focusing on respect for authority showed heightened developmental distress patterns as children struggle with conflicting emotional impulses. Australian children from cultures emphasizing individual expression showed balanced patterns across emotional states, suggesting that cultural permission for emotional expression allows full emotional range development. German children demonstrated unique patterns where frustration dominated other emotions, reflecting cultural values around persistence and problem-solving. Mexican toddlers showed elevated confusion patterns, possibly related to navigating complex extended family dynamics and multiple authority figures. Swedish children exhibited enhanced sadness responses, potentially connected to cultural emphasis on emotional processing and validation. These cultural variations suggest that emotional development adapts to match social expectations and environmental demands. The implications for understanding nature versus nurture in emotional development are profound. The research demonstrates that biological emotional systems interact with cultural learning from the earliest stages of development. Children aren't simply expressing innate emotional patterns, but rather learning culturally appropriate ways to experience and communicate distress. Emotional capacities get shaped and emphasized differently depending on cultural context. This interaction between biology and culture occurs at the neural level, creating measurable differences in brain activity patterns. These findings challenge universal theories of child psychology that assume standardized emotional development across all human populations. The research suggests that emotional milestones, regulation strategies, and expression patterns cannot be evaluated using single cultural standards. What appears as delayed emotional development in one culture might represent advanced emotional sophistication in another. The variations indicate that emotional development follows different trajectories that reflect cultural values rather than universal biological programming. The studies reveal that cultural context shapes neural development patterns through specific pathways that become established during early childhood. Children from cultures emphasizing emotional control develop stronger neural pathways between the prefrontal cortex and emotional processing centers. Those from cultures encouraging emotional expression show enhanced connectivity between emotional centers and communication regions. These neural differences persist throughout development, creating lasting changes in how individuals process and respond to emotional experiences. The research demonstrates that cultural learning begins influencing emotional development much earlier than previously recognized. Toddlers show culturally specific tantrum patterns by 18 months of age, suggesting that social learning shapes emotional expression from the beginning of language development. Children observe and internalize cultural norms about emotional behavior through daily interactions with caregivers and community members. These learned patterns become integrated into neural development, creating culturally specific emotional processing capabilities. The findings reveal that emotional regulation strategies must be understood within cultural frameworks rather than as universal developmental processes. Techniques that work effectively in one culture may be inappropriate or ineffective in another. The research suggests that supporting healthy emotional development requires understanding and respecting cultural values around emotional expression. Parents and professionals need culturally informed approaches that recognize different emotional development patterns as valid rather than deficient. Cultural influences extend beyond immediate family environments to include broader community values and social structures. Children from cultures with strong extended family networks show different emotional patterns than those from nuclear family structures. Community attitudes toward childhood, authority relationships, and social harmony all influence how children experienced and expressed emotional distress. These broader cultural factors shape tantrum patterns through complex social learning processes. The discovery that migration and cultural transition affect tantrum patterns provides additional evidence for cultural influence on emotional development. Children from immigrant families showed mixed emotional patterns that reflected both heritage culture influences and adaptation to new cultural contexts. These transition patterns suggest that emotional development remains flexible and responsive to cultural change throughout early childhood. Tantrums represent the intersection of biological emotional capacities with cultural learning about appropriate expression and regulation. The research reveals that emotional development cannot be understood without considering the cultural context that shapes how children learn to experience, express, and manage their feelings from the earliest stages of life. But understanding cultural variations was only part of the puzzle. The breakthrough that would transform how parents approach these challenging moments was emerging from an entirely different area of neuroscience research, the mirror neuron revolution. Scientists studying parent-child interactions during emotional episodes discovered that mirror neurons create direct neural connections between family members that fundamentally change how we understand tantrum dynamics. Dr. Rachel Thompson's team at Johns Hopkins developed synchronized brain imaging technology that could monitor both parent and child brains simultaneously during tantrum episodes. This dual brain imaging system uses wireless sensors that track neural activity in real time, allowing researchers to observe how parental brain states influence child brain responses moment by moment. The advanced brain imaging revealed mirror neuron activity in both parent and child that creates direct neural connections during emotional episodes. Mirror neurons fire both when we experience emotions ourselves and when we observe emotions in others, creating biological pathways for emotional sharing. The 2025 research showed that these neurons activate simultaneously in parent and child brains, creating synchronized neural patterns that link their emotional experiences. Parent mirror neurons respond to child emotional states, while child mirror neurons simultaneously mirror parental emotional responses, creating feedback loops that intensify or calm emotional episodes. The finding that mirror neurons are hyperactive during tantrum episodes challenge assumptions about emotional independence between parents and children. Brain imaging showed that mirror neuron activity increases by 450% during tantrum episodes compared to calm interactions. These neurons fire continuously throughout emotional episodes, creating constant neural communication between parent and child brains. The hyperactivity occurs in specific brain regions associated with emotional processing, facial recognition, and vocal interpretation, suggesting that parents and children are biologically designed to share emotional experiences during distressing moments. Parental emotional states directly influence the child's complex emotional patterns through these hyperactive mirror neuron pathways. When parents experience anxiety during tantrums, their mirror neurons transmit stress signals that amplify the child's fear and overwhelm responses. Frustrated parents trigger enhanced anger and frustration patterns in their children through direct neural communication. Calm parents activate mirror neurons that reduce emotional intensity across multiple emotion categories. The research showed that parental emotional states can shift child emotional patterns within 30 seconds of neural contact through mirror neuron activation. The discovery of emotional contagion pathways in the brain revealed specific neural routes through which parental emotions travel to influence child emotional states. These pathways connect the parent's emotional processing centers directly to the child's emotional response systems through mirror neuron networks. The anterior cingulate cortex in parents communicates with the child's emotional regulation centers, while parental prefrontal cortex activity influences child attention and behavioral responses. These pathways operate below conscious awareness, creating automatic emotional transmission that occurs faster than intentional parenting responses. The research demonstrated that emotional contagion happens through measurable neural mechanisms rather than simple behavioral observation. Parent stress hormones create detectable changes in their mirror neuron firing patterns, which then influence child neural activity through electromagnetic field interactions. The emotional contagion pathways can transmit complex emotional information, including subtle variations in intensity, duration, and emotional combinations. Children receive not just basic emotional signals, but detailed information about parental emotional states that shapes their own emotional responses. Staying calm isn't just good advice, but neurologically necessary because parental emotional states directly program child emotional responses through mirror neuron activation. When parents maintain calm neural states, their mirror neurons transmit regulating signals that help organize chaotic child emotional patterns. Calm parental brains produce neural frequencies that resonate with child emotional regulation centers, creating stabilizing effects on the complex emotional system. The research showed that parental calmness reduces child emotional intensity by an average of 65% through direct neural influence rather than behavioral modeling. The neurological necessity of parental calmness extends beyond immediate tantrum management to influence long-term emotional development. Children whose parents maintain calm neural states during emotional episodes develop stronger emotional regulation capabilities over time. The repeated exposure to calm mirror neuron signals helps children build neural pathways for self-regulation and emotional control. Conversely, children exposed to anxious or frustrated parental neural states develop hyperactive emotional response systems that persist into later childhood. Specific parental behaviors can shift the child's emotional processing through targeted mirror neuron activation. Deep breathing by parents creates measurable changes in their neural patterns that directly influence child emotional states through mirror neuron transmission. Soft vocal tones activate mirror neurons that reduce child anger and fear responses while enhancing sadness patterns that are easier to comfort. Physical proximity activates mirror neurons differently than distance, with close presence creating stronger neural synchronization effects. The research revealed that parental facial expressions create immediate changes in child emotional patterns through visual mirror neuron activation. Concerned facial expressions amplify child fear and overwhelm responses, while neutral expressions allow natural emotional processing without additional neural interference. Parental eye contact activates specific mirror neuron pathways that can either intensify or calm child emotional states depending on emotional content transmitted through the eyes. These findings suggest that parents can consciously influence their child's emotional experience through careful management of their own neural states. The implications for understanding parent-child neural synchronization extend beyond tantrum management to encompass all emotional interactions. The research demonstrates that parents and children exist in constant neural communication through mirror neuron networks that operate throughout daily interactions. This synchronization affects not just emotional responses, but also attention, learning, and behavioral regulation through shared neural experiences. Parent-child neural synchronization creates biological foundations for attachment, emotional development, and social learning that persist throughout childhood. Tantrums are actually two brain experiences involving both parent and child, connected through mirror neuron networks that create shared emotional processing. The research demonstrates that emotional episodes cannot be understood as isolated child experiences, but rather as interactive neural events where parental brain states directly influence child emotional responses through biological pathways that operate below conscious awareness. This understanding of neural synchronization between parents and children opened the door to developing entirely new approaches to supporting families through these challenging moments. The intervention breakthrough. These neural connections provided a foundation for developing revolutionary intervention strategies that transform how families navigate emotional episodes. The 2025 approaches represent the most significant advancement in tantrum management since child psychology began studying emotional development. These new methods completely abandoned traditional one-size-fits-all approaches that treated all tantrums as identical anger episodes. Instead, parents now have access to sophisticated tools that recognize the complex emotional reality of what children actually experience during these challenging moments. The strategies acknowledge that effective tantrum intervention requires understanding which specific emotions are driving behavior and responding to each emotional component appropriately. Parents no longer feel helpless during tantrum episodes because they finally understand what their children are experiencing internally. The research-based model provides a roadmap for navigating emotional episodes that previously seemed chaotic and unpredictable. Families report feeling more confident and less stressed because they can identify specific emotional needs and respond with targeted strategies rather than guessing about what might help. Real-time emotion monitoring apps help parents respond appropriately by analyzing vocal patterns, behavioral cues, and physiological indicators during tantrum episodes. These applications use advanced algorithms that process audio data in real time, identifying which emotions are most prominent at any given moment. The apps provide immediate feedback through simple visual displays that show parents exactly what their child is experiencing emotionally. Parents receive specific suggestions for intervention strategies based on the emotional combinations their child is displaying. The technology connects to smartphones and tablets, making it accessible during actual tantrum episodes rather than requiring complex setup procedures. The development of emotion-specific intervention techniques represents a complete departure from generic comfort strategies that fail to address the complexity of toddler emotional experiences. Anger interventions focus on providing safe physical outlets and validating the child's sense of violation or frustration. Sadness interventions emphasize comfort, physical closeness, and emotional validation to address the child's need for connection and support. Fear interventions prioritize safety, reassurance, and environmental modifications to reduce perceived threats. Frustration interventions help children identify problems and develop age-appropriate solutions or alternative approaches. Each intervention technique addresses the specific neural patterns and emotional needs associated with individual emotions rather than applying broad approaches that might miss the actual emotional experience. The targeted strategies recognize that a child expressing anger might simultaneously need comfort for underlying sadness, reassurance for hidden fears, and problem-solving support for frustration. Parents learn to provide layered responses that acknowledge multiple emotional needs simultaneously rather than focusing on the most obvious behavioral manifestation. The statistics showing dramatic improvements in tantrum resolution times demonstrate the effectiveness of emotion-specific approaches compared to traditional methods. Children whose parents use the new intervention strategies experience tantrum episodes that lasted an average of 40% shorter than those using conventional approaches. The reduction in duration occurred across all age groups in tantrum triggers, suggesting that the research-based model applies universally to toddler emotional experiences. Parents reported that targeted interventions felt more natural and intuitive because they addressed what children actually needed rather than what adults assumed they needed. The surprising effectiveness of addressing multiple emotions simultaneously challenges the assumption that emotional interventions should focus on single emotional states. Research shows that acknowledging all emotions present during tantrum episodes creates faster resolution and more complete emotional processing. Parents who say things like, "I see that you're angry and sad and confused right now," help children feel understood in ways that single emotional responses cannot achieve. This comprehensive acknowledgement validates the child's actual emotional experience rather than forcing them to simplify their feelings to match adult expectations. These techniques reduce tantrum frequency and intensity through multiple mechanisms that address both immediate episodes and long-term emotional development. Children who receive emotion-specific interventions develop better emotional vocabulary and self-awareness, allowing them to communicate needs before reaching tantrum thresholds. The targeted approaches help children learn emotional regulation skills specific to each emotion type, creating more sophisticated coping strategies. Parents become more skilled at recognizing emotional escalation patterns and intervening before tantrums reach peak intensity. The frequency reduction occurs because children feel more understood and supported, reducing the need for intense emotional expression to communicate their needs. The intensity reduction happens because targeted interventions address root emotional causes rather than just managing behavioral symptoms. Children learn that their complex emotional experiences are normal and manageable, reducing the fear and confusion that often amplify tantrum episodes. The long-term effects include improved emotional intelligence, better communication skills, and stronger parent-child relationships based on mutual understanding. The implications for children with developmental challenges are particularly significant because these populations often experience more frequent and intense emotional episodes. Children with autism spectrum disorders benefit from emotion-specific interventions because their sensory processing differences create unique emotional experiences that generic approaches cannot address. The real-time monitoring helps parents identify emotional patterns that might be missed due to communication challenges or atypical behavioral expressions. Children with ADHD show improved emotional regulation when parents can distinguish between frustration related to attention difficulties and overwhelm related to sensory processing. The intervention strategies provide frameworks for supporting children with various developmental differences, including anxiety disorders, sensory processing challenges, and language delays. Parents learn to recognize how developmental challenges influence emotional expression and adjust their responses accordingly. The approaches create more inclusive support systems that acknowledge diverse emotional experiences rather than expecting all children to fit standard emotional development models. Science-based parenting transforms the tantrum experience for both child and parent by replacing guesswork with evidence-based strategies that address the complex emotional reality of toddler development. Parents report feeling more confident and less stressed because they understand what their children are experiencing and have specific tools to help. Children benefit from feeling understood and supported during their most challenging emotional moments, creating foundations for healthy emotional development that extend throughout childhood. However, as researchers refined these intervention techniques and applied them across diverse populations, they began noticing patterns that suggested not all tantrum episodes represented typical emotional development. Some children showed emotional combinations and intensities that differed significantly from expected patterns, raising questions about what these variations might indicate. The developmental disorder connection. These distinctive patterns reveal that certain emotional combinations serve as early indicators of developmental differences that require specialized support. While most tantrums represent normal emotional development, some episodes signal deeper developmental issues that require professional attention. Parents often struggle to distinguish between typical tantrum behavior and patterns that indicate underlying conditions like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, or sensory processing challenges. The difficulty lies in recognizing subtle differences that emerge within seemingly normal emotional episodes. The research revealed new diagnostic markers that transform how professionals identify developmental disorders in young children. Dr. Michael Torres' team at Boston Children's Hospital discovered that specific combinations of anger and sadness create distinctive patterns that correlate with various developmental conditions. These patterns emerge from analyzing over 15,000 tantrum episodes across children with confirmed developmental diagnoses and typically developing peers. The research team identified measurable differences in emotional intensity, duration, and sequencing that distinguish atypical development from normal emotional variation. The 2025 studies identified specific emotional patterns linked to developmental disorders through comprehensive analysis of brain activity, vocal patterns, and behavioral responses during tantrum episodes. Children with autism spectrum conditions showed unique emotional signatures that differed significantly from typical development patterns. ADHD children demonstrated distinct emotional processing characteristics that emerged consistently across multiple tantrum episodes. Sensory processing disorders created identifiable patterns in how children experience and express emotions during emotional episodes. Children with autism showed elevated levels of distress, combined with reduced sadness responses during tantrum episodes. Their emotional patterns demonstrated heightened confusion and overwhelm, while displaying atypical anger expressions that lasted longer than typical development. The research found that autistic children experience more intense fear responses during emotional episodes, often triggered by sensory experiences that wouldn't distress typically developing children. These children showed delayed emotional processing, with emotions emerging more slowly and persisting longer than typical patterns. Autism spectrum patterns also included unique transitions between emotions that created distinctive signatures in brain imaging data. The research revealed that autistic children experience emotional combinations that rarely appeared in typically developing populations. Their tantrum episodes included specific sequences of distress followed by prolonged overwhelm that created identifiable diagnostic markers. These patterns remain consistent across different triggering events, suggesting fundamental differences in emotional processing rather than situational responses. ADHD children showed rapid emotional transitions with heightened frustration and anger responses that cycled repeatedly throughout tantrum episodes. Their emotional patterns demonstrated difficulty maintaining sustained emotional states, with frequent shifts between different emotional combinations. The research identified specific emotional combinations that predict future developmental challenges, allowing for proactive intervention before formal diagnoses become necessary. Anxiety disorders created unique patterns of prolonged fear and overwhelm responses that persisted beyond typical tantrum resolution timeframes. Language delays produce distinctive patterns in distress, combined with elevated confusion responses during emotional episodes. Children with sensory processing challenges showed unique overwhelm patterns triggered by environmental factors that would affect typically developing children. The vocal analysis revealed that these children produced different frequency characteristics during anger and frustration episodes compared to typical development patterns. The development of diagnostic tools based on vocalization patterns represents a revolutionary advancement in pediatric assessment capabilities. These tools analyze the acoustic properties of tantrum vocalizations to identify emotional signatures associated with specific developmental conditions. The technology processes vocal frequency patterns, rhythm characteristics, and intensity variations that correlate with different developmental profiles. Healthcare providers can use these tools during routine appointments to screen for potential developmental concerns without requiring specialized testing environments. The vocalization analysis tools detect subtle differences in how children with various conditions express emotions through sound. Autistic children produce vocal patterns with specific frequency characteristics that differ from typical development during anger episodes. ADHD children demonstrate rapid vocal transitions that mirror their emotional instability during tantrum episodes. The tools provide objective measurements that complement clinical observations, creating more comprehensive assessment approaches. Early identification leads to better intervention outcomes because developmental support services prove most effective when implemented during critical developmental windows. Children who receive targeted interventions based on tantrum pattern analysis show improved emotional regulation, communication skills, and social development compared to those who receive generic support services. The research demonstrates that understanding specific emotional patterns allows for customized intervention strategies that address individual developmental needs. The timing of intervention proves crucial because neuroplasticity during early childhood allows for more significant developmental changes than later intervention periods. Children identified through tantrum analysis receive appropriate support services months or years earlier than traditional diagnostic timelines allow. This early support prevents secondary complications that often develop when developmental challenges go unaddressed during critical periods. This research revolutionizes pediatric mental health screening by providing objective, measurable indicators of developmental differences that don't require complex testing procedures. Healthcare providers can incorporate tantrum pattern analysis into routine well-child visits, creating systematic screening processes that identify children who need additional evaluation. The approach reduces reliance on subjective behavioral observations that vary between providers and appointment settings. The implications for supporting children with special needs extend far beyond diagnostic capabilities to include comprehensive support planning based on individual emotional profiles. Understanding specific emotional patterns allows support teams to develop targeted strategies that address each child's unique combination of developmental challenges. Support services incorporate emotion-specific interventions that address the particular emotional combinations associated with different developmental conditions. The research transforms family support services by providing parents with specific information about their child's emotional experiences and developmental needs. Families receive training in recognizing and responding to their child's unique emotional patterns, creating more effective home support environments. The approach reduces family stress by providing concrete explanations for challenging behaviors and specific strategies for managing emotional episodes. Tantrums serve as powerful diagnostic tools when properly understood, providing valuable insights into developmental trajectories that remain hidden through traditional assessment methods. The emotional patterns revealed through tantrum analysis offer objective indicators of developmental differences that emerge years before formal diagnostic criteria can be met. This understanding transforms challenging behavioral episodes into opportunities for early identification and support that can significantly improve long-term outcomes for children with developmental differences. These discoveries represent only the beginning of what researchers are uncovering about the sophisticated emotional world that exists within every toddler's developing mind. The future of tantrum science. Research laboratories across the globe are launching ambitious new studies that will explore dimensions of toddler emotional complexity that were previously unimaginable. The anger and sadness patterns discovered in 2025 have opened pathways for investigation that extend far beyond tantrum episodes into fundamental questions about human emotional architecture. Scientists are preparing to examine how these emotional patterns influence learning, social development, and cognitive growth throughout childhood. The 2025 findings are opening new research directions that span multiple disciplines, including neuroscience, genetics, education, and artificial intelligence. Universities are establishing specialized research centers dedicated to studying emotional complexity in early childhood. The National Science Foundation has approved funding for 12 major research initiatives that will build on the dual emotion framework. International collaborations are forming to examine how emotional patterns vary across different populations and environmental contexts. These new research directions promise to revolutionize our understanding of human emotional development from the earliest stages of life. Upcoming studies on genetic factors influencing emotional patterns will examine how DNA variations contribute to individual differences in emotional expression and regulation. Researchers at the University of California, San Diego are preparing to analyze genetic samples from over 2,000 children who participated in the original Tantrum studies. The research will focus on identifying specific genes that influence the intensity, duration, and frequency of anger and sadness components during emotional episodes. Scientists expect to discover genetic markers that predict which children are likely to experience more complex emotional patterns during development. The genetic research will examine how hereditary factors interact with environmental influences to shape emotional expression patterns. Studies will track families across multiple generations to identify genetic patterns that influence emotional development. Research teams are developing new genetic analysis techniques that can identify subtle variations in emotional processing genes. The studies will explore how genetic factors contribute to the individual differences observed in tantrum patterns across different children. Plans for AI-powered tantrum prediction and prevention systems represent the most ambitious technological application of the research findings. These systems will analyze various data points, including vocalization patterns, behavioral cues, and environmental factors to predict the likelihood of tantrum episodes. The technology will provide real-time feedback to parents and caregivers, offering personalized strategies to de-escalate potential outbursts before they escalate. Advanced machine learning algorithms will process continuous data streams from wearable devices that monitor physiological indicators of emotional buildup. The AI systems will incorporate environmental sensors that detect factors like noise levels, temperature changes, and social dynamics that might trigger emotional episodes. Parents will receive smartphone alerts when their child's emotional patterns suggest an approaching tantrum, along with specific intervention strategies tailored to the predicted emotional combination. The technology will learn from each family's unique patterns, becoming more accurate over time at predicting and preventing emotional crises. This research might transform early childhood education by enabling educators to recognize and respond to individual emotional patterns in classroom settings. Schools will implement emotion monitoring systems that help teachers identify children who need additional support during emotionally challenging moments. Educational approaches will be customized based on each child's unique emotional profile, creating more effective learning environments. Teachers will receive training in recognizing anger and sadness patterns and implementing targeted interventions that support healthy emotional development. The transformation of early childhood education will include curriculum modifications that acknowledge emotional complexity as a fundamental aspect of learning. Classrooms will be designed with emotional regulation support systems that help children manage complex feelings during academic activities. Educational assessment methods will incorporate emotional development measures that recognize the sophisticated emotional capabilities of young children. Schools will develop specialized programs for children whose emotional patterns indicate advanced emotional intelligence or unique support needs. Understanding emotional complexity could revolutionize child psychology by providing objective measures of emotional development that replace subjective behavioral observations. The dual emotion framework will become the foundation for new diagnostic tools that identify emotional development differences with greater precision. Therapeutic approaches will be redesigned to address the specific emotional combinations that individual children experience rather than applying generic treatment strategies. Mental health professionals will receive specialized training in recognizing and treating complex emotional patterns in young children. The potential for personalized parenting strategies based on individual emotional profiles will transform how families approach child rearing. Parents will receive detailed analyses of their child's unique emotional patterns, including specific triggers, intensities, and regulation strategies that work best for their individual child. Parenting apps will provide customized advice based on real-time analysis of their child's emotional states and behavioral patterns. Family support services will offer personalized training programs that teach parents to recognize and respond to their child's specific emotional needs. This research connects to broader questions about human emotional intelligence by revealing that sophisticated emotional processing begins much earlier than previously recognized. The simultaneous anger and sadness pattern suggests that emotional complexity represents a fundamental aspect of human development rather than a learned skill that emerges later in childhood. Research will examine how early emotional complexity influences adult emotional intelligence and social competence throughout the lifespan. Scientists will investigate whether supporting complex emotional development in toddlers leads to enhanced emotional capabilities in later life. The connection to human emotional intelligence research will explore how the dual emotion patterns relate to established models of emotional competence. Studies will examine whether children who experience more complex emotional episodes develop superior emotional intelligence skills compared to those with simpler emotional patterns. Research will investigate how emotional complexity in early childhood influences creativity, problem-solving abilities, and social relationships throughout development. The sophisticated emotional world of toddlers represents a frontier of human development research that promises to reshape our understanding of childhood itself. The discovery that toddlers simultaneously experience anger and sadness reveals emotional capabilities that rival those of adults in complexity and sophistication. Future research will continue to uncover additional layers of emotional complexity that exist within seemingly simple behavioral episodes. Scientists expect to discover emotional patterns and capabilities that will further transform our understanding of what young children experience and how we can support their development. This ongoing research promises to provide valuable insights into the nature of human emotions and how to support healthy emotional development from the earliest stages of life. The sophisticated emotional processing observed in toddlers suggests that emotional development follows more complex pathways than previously imagined. Each new discovery reveals that what we thought we knew about these challenging episodes barely scratches the surface of what's actually happening inside developing minds. These discoveries mark a fundamental shift in how we understand one of childhood's most challenging behaviors. The 2025 research reveals that tantrums represent complex emotional experiences involving simultaneous anger and sadness, supported by sophisticated neural processing that demonstrates remarkable capabilities in developing minds. We've moved beyond viewing these episodes as simple outbursts to recognizing them as intricate emotional communications that provide valuable insights into child development. The next time you witness a tantrum, remember you're observing advanced emotional processing in action. These aren't breakdowns, but sophisticated expressions of multiple emotions occurring simultaneously. Every tantrum offers a window into the remarkable complexity of the developing human mind, deserving our understanding and support rather than our frustration as we continue learning about these fascinating emotional experiences.